Today's story uncovers three tragic cases of young lives stolen in heartbreaking and unimaginable ways. First, the story of Gabby Petito, whose murder during a cross-country road trip captured global attention and raised awareness about domestic violence. Then, the shocking case of Savanna Greywind, an Indigenous woman whose life was brutally taken in a horrifying plot to steal her unborn child. Finally, the devastating murder of Tristyn Bailey, a 13-year-old whose life was cut short by a peer, leaving a community in mourning. But before we begin, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place. We upload daily, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of September 11, 2021, a phone call shattered the quiet normalcy of Blue Point, New York. Gabby Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, dialed 911 with trembling hands. Her daughter, a 22-year-old aspiring travel blogger, had gone silent. For weeks, there had been no calls, no texts, and no updates on social media. Gabby, who usually kept her family updated with cheerful updates and photos from her cross-country road trip, had vanished. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Gabby's last known location was in Wyoming's Grand Teton National Park, a sprawling expanse of rugged mountains and dense forests. She had been on the road with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, exploring America's national parks in a converted white van. Their journey, chronicled on social media, seemed idyllic, a couple living their dream life, chasing sunsets and documenting every mile. But behind the curated posts lay cracks in their relationship, cracks that would soon become impossible to ignore. What no one knew at the time was that Brian Laundrie had already returned to his parents' home in Northport, Florida. He had driven Gabby's van across the country, alone. He said nothing about Gabby's whereabouts, gave no explanation, and showed no urgency to find her. Instead, he quietly slipped into his parents' house and resumed life as if nothing had happened. When Nicole reported Gabby missing, the police began their investigation, but something was off from the start. Calls to Brian's phone went unanswered. When officers arrived at the Laundrie home, they were met with silence. The family referred them to an attorney, refusing to cooperate. The white van, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now became a key piece of evidence. Gabby's belongings were inside, but she was nowhere to be found. The timeline became a puzzle. On August 24th, Gabby and Brian had been spotted together in Salt Lake City, Utah, at a hotel near the airport. The following day, Gabby called her mom, sounding upbeat and excited about their next stop, Grand Teton National Park. That call would be the last time anyone heard her voice. By August 27, witnesses at a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming, recalled a heated argument between Gabby and Brian Doyle. The confrontation was so intense that it left the staff shaken. Gabby was seen crying, apologizing to waitstaff, while Brian appeared angry and agitated. This public display hinted at deeper troubles, a toxic dynamic that was quickly unraveling. Hours later, Gabby's social media posts abruptly stopped. On August 30th, Nicole received a text from Gabby's phone that read, "No service in Yosemite." But something about the message felt wrong. The wording was uncharacteristic of Gabby, and Yosemite wasn't part of their planned route. Nicole suspected that someone else had sent it, a chilling thought that added to her growing dread. As news of Gabby's disappearance spread, the public's attention turned toward Brian. His silence became deafening. While Gabby's family pleaded for answers, Brian remained holed up in his parents' home, shielded by a wall of legal counsel. The Laundries issued a brief statement through their lawyer, expressing hope that Gabby would be found safe, but offered no help in the search. To the Petito family, and to a growing number of concerned strangers online, this was unthinkable. If Brian knew something, anything, why wouldn't he speak? Meanwhile, social media exploded with theories and amateur investigations. Gabby's story struck a nerve, resonating with thousands who shared her photos and analyzed every detail of her life. TikTok videos, Instagram posts, and Twitter threads flooded the internet, each one dissecting her disappearance. The hashtag #FindGabbyPetito trended worldwide as ordinary people became digital detectives, scouring maps, surveillance footage, and satellite images for clues. Among these tips, one breakthrough stood out. A family of travel vloggers who had been recording their journey through Grand Teton reviewed their footage and noticed something chilling. In one clip, filmed on August 27th, they spotted Gabby's van parked on the side of a dirt road near a remote campsite. The van's rear door appeared to close abruptly as the vlogger's vehicle approached. This footage gave investigators a critical lead, narrowing the search area in a vast wilderness. On September 19th, after days of searching, a team of FBI agents and park rangers made a grim discovery. In a secluded area of the Bridger-Teton National Forest, near where the van had been spotted, they found human remains. The area was remote, accessible only by foot, and eerily quiet. Within hours, forensic analysis confirmed what many had feared. The remains belonged to Gabby Petito. The autopsy later revealed that Gabby's death was caused by strangulation, a finding that pointed unmistakably toward foul play. Her life had been taken violently, senselessly, and far too soon. For her family, the confirmation was a devastating blow. The daughter they had hoped to bring home safely was gone. As investigators shifted their focus to Brian Laundrie, the case took an even darker turn. On September 13th, just 2 days after Gabby was reported missing, Brian left his parents' home and disappeared into the nearby Carlton Reserve, a sprawling expanse of swampland filled with alligators, snakes, and dense foliage. His parents claimed he had gone hiking, but days turned into weeks with no sign of him. The reserve became the site of an exhaustive search, with officers wading through waist-deep water, battling the elements in a desperate effort to locate him. Brian Laundrie had become the key to unlocking the truth, but as the days stretched on, his absence only deepened the mystery. What had happened in those final days in Wyoming? What had driven him to such desperate measures? And most importantly, would justice for Gabby ever be served? The answers seemed just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of a case that had gripped the nation. In the days following the discovery of Gabby Petito's remains, the focus of the investigation turned squarely onto Brian Laundrie. His silence had already painted him as a central figure in the unfolding tragedy, and now his sudden disappearance only deepened the public's suspicion. For law enforcement, finding Brian became a race against time. He wasn't just a person of interest anymore. He was potentially the key to unlocking what had truly happened in the wilderness of Wyoming. The Carlton Reserve, where Brian's parents claimed he had gone hiking, stretched across over 25,000 acres of swampy terrain. It was the kind of place few would willingly wander into without preparation. Thick vegetation, venomous snakes, and lurking alligators made the reserve treacherous, even for seasoned outdoorsmen. Search teams, equipped with drones, ATVs, and K9 units, combed the area day and night. Yet, despite their efforts, there was no trace of Brian. As the search dragged on, the Laundrie family's behavior came under intense scrutiny. Why had they waited days to report Brian's disappearance? Did they know more than they were letting on? Protesters gathered outside their home, chanting for answers, holding signs demanding justice for Gabby. Inside, the family remained silent, shielded behind a wall of legal advice and secrecy. To the public, their lack of cooperation felt like complicity. Meanwhile, the internet was ablaze with speculation. Social media sleuths pieced together timelines, dissected videos, and proposed wild theories. Some claimed Brian had fled the country, while others suggested he was hiding in plain sight. Sightings of Brian poured in from across the country. A man matching his description was seen on hiking trails, in small-town diners, even at gas stations. Each tip sent law enforcement scrambling, only to end in frustration when the leads turned cold. Among the many tips, one discovery stood out. A hiker on the Appalachian Trail, hundreds of miles from Florida, reported encountering a man who seemed disoriented and evasive. The man fit Brian's description and spoke briefly before retreating into the woods. The encounter sparked a renewed wave of searches in the area, but once again, no definitive evidence emerged. As the manhunt continued, the FBI worked quietly to piece together Gabby's final days. Forensic evidence from the van provided chilling insights. Hair, fibers, and fingerprints painted a picture of a young woman who had spent her last days in fear and isolation. Investigators also retrieved digital records, texts, location data, and photos that hinted at escalating tension between Gabby and Brian during their trip. Each new detail brought them closer to understanding the events that led to her death. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from Gabby's own social media accounts. Her posts, once vibrant and full of life, had taken a subtle but noticeable shift in tone. Friends who had been following her journey pointed out that Gabby's smile seemed strained in recent photos, her captions more subdued. These observations, coupled with eyewitness accounts of their public arguments, painted a stark contrast to the image of a carefree couple living their dream. The investigation also revealed a disturbing pattern in Brian's behavior. Interviews with his former friends and acquaintances suggested a controlling and volatile personality. While many described him as charming and charismatic, there were underlying accounts of possessiveness and sudden bursts of anger. These glimpses into his past raised questions about what truly went on behind the scenes of their seemingly picture-perfect relationship. Amid the mounting evidence, the Laundrie family finally broke their silence, issuing a statement through their lawyer. They expressed sympathy for Gabby's family but denied any involvement in Brian's disappearance. The statement, however, did little to quell public outrage. If anything, it fueled the belief that they were shielding their son from accountability. By now, the search for Brian had reached a fever pitch. Helicopters hovered above the reserve, their searchlights cutting through the dense canopy. Divers plunged into murky waters, braving alligator-infested swamps in the hopes of finding a single clue. The public followed every update with bated breath, their frustration growing with each passing day. Then, in mid-October, a breakthrough. Brian's belongings, backpack, notebook, and personal items were discovered near a trail in the Carlton Reserve. The location was remote, an area that had previously been submerged under floodwaters. Nearby, investigators made a grim discovery: skeletal remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what many had already suspected: the remains belonged to Brian Laundrie. The discovery brought some answers but also left a trail of unanswered questions. Musts. Among Brian's belongings, the notebook drew particular attention. What secrets did it hold? Could it shed light on what had happened in those final moments between him and Gabby? The public, now deeply invested in the case, demanded transparency. Forensic experts carefully examined the water-damaged pages, recovering fragments of writing that hinted at remorse and despair. Though the details were never fully disclosed, investigators confirmed that the notebook contained a confession. In it, Brian admitted to being responsible for Gabby's death, though the exact circumstances remained unclear. With Brian's death confirmed, the case took on an even more haunting tone. The manhunt was over, but the pain and grief lingered for Gabby's family. For them, there would never be true closure, just the enduring memory of a daughter lost too soon and a relationship that turned fatally toxic. As the investigation officially closed, the world reflected on the case that had captivated millions. Gabby's story became a rallying cry for victims of abuse, a tragic reminder of the dangers that can hide behind a facade of happiness. But even as the case faded from headlines, its impact continued to resonate, sparking important conversations about justice, accountability, and the power of collective awareness. The discovery of Brian Laundrie's remains sent ripples through the case, shifting the focus of the investigation from pursuit to unraveling the truth. While the manhunt had come to an end, the questions surrounding Gabby Petito's final days remained unanswered. The items found near Brian, his backpack, a notebook, and scattered personal effects, became critical to piecing together the events that led to the tragedy. The notebook, heavily damaged by water from the swampy terrain, became the centerpiece of investigators' efforts. Specialists worked meticulously to recover its contents, drying and preserving the pages to reveal fragments of writing. What they uncovered painted a picture of regret, desperation, and a confession. Brian admitted responsibility for Gabby's death, but his words were cryptic, leaving out key details about the circumstances. It was clear he had been grappling with guilt, but the exact nature of his motives remained elusive. While the confession provided some closure to the public and Gabby's family, it raised more questions than it answered. What had truly transpired during those fateful days in Wyoming? And why had Brian chosen to flee instead of facing the consequences? These questions drove investigators to dig deeper, analyzing every scrap of evidence left behind in the wilderness. Forensic experts revisited the campsite where Gabby's remains had been discovered, hoping to uncover overlooked clues. They examined footprints, disturbed vegetation, and traces of ash from what appeared to be a hastily extinguished fire. Every detail pointed to a chaotic and emotionally charged confrontation. The area was remote, surrounded by dense trees and rugged terrain, a place that offered solitude but also isolation. It was the kind of place where secrets could be buried, both figuratively and literally. The autopsy report revealed more about Gabby's final moments, but its findings were devastating. The cause of death was confirmed as strangulation, a method that indicated a deeply personal and violent act. Experts explained that this form of harm often involved a close relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, further cementing Brian's role in the tragedy. For Gabby's family, these details were agonizing, but they also provided clarity about the danger she had faced. As the evidence mounted, so did public fascination with the case. The media frenzy reached unprecedented levels, with every update dissected in news segments, podcasts, and online forums. Social media became a platform for heated debates, with some users speculating about Brian's mental state, while others criticized the handling of the case by law enforcement. Gabby's name became synonymous with discussions about domestic violence, the power of social media, and the complexities of modern relationships. Amid the chaos, Gabby's family worked tirelessly to preserve her legacy. They established the Gabby Petito Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families of missing persons and raising awareness about domestic violence. For them, this was a way to channel their grief into something meaningful, ensuring that Gabby's story would not be forgotten. In the weeks following Brian's discovery, the Laundrie family also came under renewed scrutiny. Public outrage persisted as many questioned their actions during the investigation. Critics accused them of withholding information that could have helped locate Gabby sooner or bring Brian into custody before his disappearance. Though their legal team maintained that the family had cooperated within the bounds of the law, the court of public opinion remained harsh. Meanwhile, investigators continued to analyze the digital trail left by Brian and Gabby. Their phones, laptops, and cloud accounts provided glimpses into the dynamics of their relationship. Text messages recovered from Gabby's phone painted a picture of increasing tension in the weeks leading up to her death. Friends recalled conversations where Gabby expressed frustration and fear about Brian's controlling behavior. These digital breadcrumbs offered a stark contrast to the idyllic image portrayed on social media. One particularly chilling discovery came from a text sent from Gabby's phone to her mother on August 27, the same day witnesses reported seeing her and Brian arguing at a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming. The message read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." To Nicole Schmidt, this was an immediate red flag. Gabby never referred to her grandfather by his first name, Stan. Investigators later speculated that Brian may have sent the message in an attempt to mislead Gabby's family about her state of mind. As more details emerged, a troubling narrative took shape. Brian's behavior throughout the trip had grown increasingly erratic, with episodes of jealousy and anger escalating into outright hostility. Witnesses who encountered the couple during their travels described moments of tension, with Gabby often appearing anxious or upset. The body cam footage from the Moab police Stop Now took on an even darker significance, showing a young woman trying to downplay her fear while navigating a volatile situation. The search for answers wasn't confined to the Laundrie family or law enforcement. Across the country, people continued to dig into the case, hoping to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. True crime enthusiasts and amateur detectives scoured maps, rewatched videos, and pored over interviews, each hoping to uncover a detail that could bring greater clarity. But the truth, like the swampy terrain of the Carlton Reserve, remained murky. Brian's actions, his confession, and his ultimate decision to retreat into the wilderness left behind a trail of ambiguity. For Gabby's family, the focus shifted from seeking justice to honoring her memory, knowing that some questions would never be fully answered. As the investigation reached its official conclusion, the case left an indelible mark on everyone who had followed it. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers that can hide behind a curated image, the red flags that are often overlooked, and the devastating consequences of unresolved conflict. Gabby's story, though tragic, became a rallying cry for change, a reminder that every voice matters and every life deserves to be seen and heard. As the final pieces of the investigation fell into place, the focus shifted from Brian Laundrie's disappearance to understanding the deeper patterns of control and volatility that defined his relationship with Gabby Petito. The world now had a confession, a confirmed cause of death, and a tragic ending to a story that had captivated millions. Yet, even with these answers, the case continued to reverberate, not just in headlines, but in the hearts of those who had followed it so closely. In the days following the discovery of Brian's remains, law enforcement released more details about the items recovered near his body. The notebook, though heavily damaged, offered fragments of insight into his state of mind. His writing conveyed remorse, confusion, and a desperate attempt to justify the irreversible choices he had made. While the pages hinted at a toxic spiral of conflict between the couple, they also left glaring omissions. The circumstances that escalated their argument into tragedy were only partially illuminated, leaving room for lingering speculation. Forensic analysis of the scene where Gabby's body was found added another layer to the narrative. Investigators confirmed that the couple had set up a campsite near Spread Creek, a secluded area within Grand Teton National Park. Evidence suggested they had been there for at least 2 nights before the fatal incident occurred. A fire ring with partially burned debris hinted at attempts to maintain a sense of normalcy, even as tensions brewed. Nearby, footprints and signs of a struggle told a more chaotic story. Gabby's family, though devastated, worked tirelessly to ensure her story would not be forgotten. They had become reluctant public figures, thrust into the spotlight by a tragedy they never could have imagined. Through the Gabby Petito Foundation, they began advocating for greater awareness of relationship violence and the red flags that often precede it. Their message was clear. Gabby's story was not an isolated incident. For every Gabby, there were countless others whose voices went unheard. The public's interest in the case showed no signs of waning. True crime forums buzzed with theories, many attempting to fill the gaps left by Brian's incomplete confession. Why had he chosen to write his final words rather than face the consequences? What did his silence during the early days of the investigation truly signify? And how much, if anything, did his family know about his plans before he vanished into the Carlton Reserve? Among these questions, a recurring theme emerged: the role of social media in shaping the narrative. Gabby's life, so meticulously documented online, had offered the world a glimpse into her aspirations and adventures. But those same platforms also became a window into the darker side of her relationship. Body cam footage from the Moab police stop, once seen as a fleeting moment of tension, now appeared to be a snapshot of something much more serious. Experts weighed in, pointing out how easily subtle signs of control and fear could be dismissed or overlooked. Law enforcement faced their own reckoning in the wake of the case. The Moab incident in particular sparked widespread criticism of how authorities handled Gabby and Brian's encounter. Advocates argued that more training was needed to recognize the dynamics of abusive relationships, especially when the victim might downplay their fear to protect themselves. In hindsight, the missed opportunities to intervene only added to the heartbreak. Meanwhile, investigators continued to unravel the timeline leading up to Gabby's death. They traced the couple's movements through phone records, credit card transactions, and eyewitness accounts. Each piece of data painted a clearer picture of their journey, from the highs of visiting iconic landmarks to the lows of escalating arguments. The stark contrast between their public-facing content and private reality underscored the complexity of their dynamic, a relationship marked by love, conflict, and an undercurrent of control. For many who followed the case, Brian's ultimate decision to flee into the wilderness was as perplexing as it was tragic. Psychological experts weighed in, offering theories about his mental state. Some suggested that the overwhelming guilt of his actions drove him to isolation, while others posited that he believed he could evade accountability altogether. Whatever his reasoning, his disappearance left behind a void that no amount of evidence could fully explain. As public attention on the Laundrie family intensified, they remained steadfast in their silence. Legal experts debated whether their decision to withhold information during the investigation was an exercise of their rights or a moral failing. The line between legal obligations and ethical responsibilities blurred, leaving many to question how they would act if faced with a similar dilemma. Despite the case officially reaching its conclusion, its impact extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. It became a catalyst for broader conversations about how society approaches missing persons cases, the nuances of intimate partner violence, and the powerful role of digital platforms in amplifying voices. Gabby's name became a symbol, a reminder that the carefully curated images of someone's life can often mask deeper struggles. Her story resonated with countless individuals who saw pieces of themselves in her journey: the yearning for adventure, the vulnerability of love, and the courage to seek something greater. And while her life was cut tragically short, the legacy she left behind ensured that her voice would continue to echo, inspiring change and bringing light to others who needed it most. As the dust settled on the investigation, the ripples of Gabby Petito's story continued to spread, touching lives far beyond those directly involved. Her name became a rallying cry for victims and families seeking justice, and her story shed light on the often hidden dynamics of relationship violence. Yet, even as the case officially closed, its echoes lingered, sparking conversations, reforms, and an enduring legacy of awareness. The public's interest in Gabby's life extended far beyond the tragic events that ended it. People were drawn to her adventurous spirit, her creative vision, and her unwavering drive to explore the world. Through her social media presence, Gabby had shared not just the beauty of her travels, but the vulnerabilities and aspirations of a young woman charting her own path. Those posts, once snapshots of joy, now carried a bittersweet weight, reminders of a life that was both full of promise and tragically fleeting. Gabby's family, grappling with an unimaginable loss, turned their grief into action. They worked tirelessly to amplify her story and use it as a platform for change. The Gabby Petito Foundation became a beacon of hope, providing resources for families of missing persons and advocating for greater education around the warning signs of toxic relationships. For them, this was more than a mission. It was a way to ensure that Gabby's light would continue to shine, even in the face of darkness. The lessons from Gabby's case reverberated through law enforcement and advocacy groups alike. Police departments across the country revisited their training protocols, particularly in how officers handle domestic disputes. The encounter between Gabby and Brian in Moab served as a stark example of how subtle signs of distress could go unnoticed or unaddressed. Advocates pushed for reforms, urging greater awareness and sensitivity in identifying potential patterns of harm. On social media, Gabby's story became a symbol of the power of digital platforms to unite communities in the face of tragedy. The hashtag #JusticeForGabby brought together millions of voices from amateur sleuths who analyzed clues to everyday people who shared her story in hopes of finding answers. Yet, it also highlighted the complexities of living in a world where private lives are increasingly public. The line between genuine concern and invasive speculation often blurred, raising questions about the ethics of online engagement in such cases. Among the many discussions sparked by the case, one stood out: the importance of recognizing the signs of unhealthy relationships before they escalate. Experts pointed to behaviors like isolation, controlling tendencies, and emotional manipulation as red flags that should never be ignored. These conversations resonated deeply with those who had experienced similar dynamics, empowering survivors to share their stories and seek help. Brian Laundrie's role in the tragedy, though conclusively linked to Gabby's death, remained a source of lingering questions. His final writings, coupled with the circumstances of his disappearance, painted a picture of inner turmoil, but offered little in the way of concrete answers. Forensic psychologists speculated about his mindset, exploring the intersection of guilt, fear, and avoidance that may have driven his actions. Yet the lack of direct accountability left an indelible mark on the case, a reminder of how justice can feel incomplete. The Laundrie family, too, remained an enigmatic presence in the narrative. Their silence during the critical early stages of the investigation sparked outrage, with many accusing them of obstructing efforts to find Gabby. Others argued that their actions, while frustrating, were not uncommon for families navigating legal complexity. Regardless of perspective, the Laundrie's choices became a focal point for debates about moral responsibility and familial loyalty. In the end, Gabby's story was far more than a tragic headline. It was a mirror reflecting society's evolving understanding of relationships, accountability, and the delicate balance between public and private life. Her journey, though cut short, became a catalyst for awareness, inspiring countless individuals to speak out, seek help, or simply look more closely at the dynamics in their own lives. The lessons drawn from her life and death extended beyond the specifics of her case. They served as a reminder of the importance of listening, of acting when something feels wrong, and of holding space for those whose voices may not always be heard. Gabby's legacy was one of courage, resilience, and the enduring impact of a life lived authentically, even in the face of adversity. As the world continued to reflect on the tragedy, The question remained: how do we ensure that stories like Gabby's lead to meaningful change? The answer, perhaps, lay in the collective commitment of those who carried her memory forward, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a beacon of hope for a better, more compassionate future. The next story is called Savanna's Act Case. On the morning of August 19, 2017, Savanna Greywind family watched her leave their apartment in Fargo, North Dakota, with a bright smile on her face. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing with the excitement of soon meeting her baby girl. The 22-year-old had plans that day, but they were simple: helping her upstairs neighbors with a sewing project. It seemed like an innocent favor, something she could quickly assist with before returning to her family below. Savanna climbed the stairs to apartment 5, where Brooke Cruz and her boyfriend, William Hone, lived. The couple had moved into the building a few months earlier, keeping mostly to themselves. While they weren't particularly friendly, there was nothing outwardly alarming about them, just another pair of faces in the building. Brooke had asked for Savanna's help sewing a dress, a request that seemed harmless enough. Minutes turned into hours, and Savanna didn't come back. Her family began to worry. This wasn't like her. She was responsible, always mindful of keeping them updated. When her mother called her phone, it rang but went unanswered. The unease grew heavier with each passing moment. Her family decided to take action. Her boyfriend, Ashton Matheny, who had been eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter, began calling and texting, trying to reach her. There was no response. Finally, they decided to knock on the door of apartment 5. When Brooke opened the door, she seemed composed, but dismissive. She claimed that Savanna had left hours ago, saying she was going to run errands. But something about Brooke's tone and the way she avoided eye contact left them unsettled. Savanna's mother, Norberta, knew her daughter wouldn't simply vanish without a word. The uneasy feeling gnawed at her, prompting her to report Savanna missing to the Fargo Police Department later that day. The officers took the report seriously, knowing that Savanna's advanced pregnancy made the situation even more urgent. They knocked on Brooke and William's door that evening to question them. Brooke repeated the same story, insisting that Savanna had left. William stood in the background, silent and detached, his presence looming, but offering no answers. Despite their initial search of the apartment, officers found no immediate evidence of foul play. Still, the timeline didn't add up, and Brooke and William's calm demeanor felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. The officers left, planning to dig deeper, but for Savanna's family, the sense of dread was overwhelming. They couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened behind that closed door. As the sun set that night, Norberta and Ashton began organizing a search. Friends, neighbors, and community members joined in, fanning out across Fargo to distribute flyers and ask for information. Social media posts about Savanna's disappearance started circulating, amplifying the urgency of the search. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to waver. Back at apartment 5, things took an even darker turn. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises, shuffling, muffled voices, and what sounded like furniture being moved. One neighbor later recalled hearing the sound of a baby crying, but at the time, it didn't make sense. Savanna was still missing, and the thought of a baby being involved in her disappearance seemed too bizarre to consider. Brooke and William, meanwhile, carried on with their daily routines, seemingly unaffected by the growing search efforts. Brooke even made a point to offer condolences to Norberta when they crossed paths, saying she hoped Savanna would be found soon. It was a chilling moment, one that left Norberta feeling both angry and helpless. How could someone who might hold answers be so detached? The Fargo police returned to apartment 5 for a second search, this time with a more thorough approach. They combed through every corner, looking for any sign of Savanna or evidence of foul play. What they didn't realize was that the truth was hidden in plain sight, concealed with chilling precision. Days stretched into a week, and the community's frustration grew. The media began covering Savanna's disappearance, drawing attention to the heartbreaking reality of a young mother to be vanishing without a trace. Her family pleaded with the public, urging anyone with information to come forward. The story struck a chord, not just because of its mystery, but because of the vulnerability of someone so close to bringing a new life into the world. On August 24th, 5 days after Savanna was last seen, the breakthrough came. A tip from a neighbor led police back to the apartment complex, this time to search the garage. Inside, investigators found a dark discovery that would forever change the course of the case. When they opened the plastic-wrapped bundle, their worst fears were confirmed. It was Savanna. Her body, lifeless and hidden away, showed clear signs of a brutal crime. But one detail stood out above all else: her baby was missing. The realization sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement alike. What had started as a missing person case had transformed into something far more sinister. Brooke Cruz and William Hone were immediately arrested, their secrets no longer hidden behind the thin walls of Apartment 5. As news of the discovery spread, the town of Fargo was gripped by a mix of grief and outrage. How could such a horrific act happen in their community? And where was Savanna's baby? The answers lay in the twisted minds of the couple, who had been living just a few steps away from her family, concealing the truth all along. As officers escorted Brooke Cruz and William Hone into custody, the tight-knit community of Fargo braced itself for the horrifying revelations that were about to unfold. Investigators were determined to piece together the chilling puzzle, and the interrogation room became the stage for the unraveling of one of the most disturbing cases the town had ever seen. Brooke was the first to break under questioning. What began as vague denials soon gave way to an unthinkable admission. She confessed to luring Savanna into her apartment under the pretense of needing help with a sewing project. Her tone was eerily calm as she recounted how, once inside, the situation turned deadly. Brooke claimed she had been desperate to have a child and saw Savanna's unborn baby as the solution to her twisted longing. Her explanation was as chilling as it was grotesque. She admitted to a violent act meant to remove the baby from Savanna. William Hone's interrogation painted a slightly different picture. He initially denied knowing what had happened to Savanna, claiming he had come home to find Brooke covered in blood, cradling the newborn. According to William, Brooke told him, "This is our baby now." He admitted to helping clean up the scene and dispose of Savanna's body, but insisted he had no involvement in the initial act. His statements, however, were riddled with contradictions, leaving investigators skeptical of his claimed ignorance. As Brooks and Williams' accounts unfolded, detectives worked tirelessly to corroborate their stories. They collected evidence from the apartment, uncovering traces of blood in the bathroom and on various surfaces. The timeline of events became clearer, painting a picture of premeditation and cold-blooded intent. Brooke had not acted on impulse. This was a plan she had devised, driven by a dark obsession. While the confessions offered some clarity, the discovery of Savanna's baby became the turning point in the investigation. Miraculously, the infant had survived and was found in the couple's custody, unharmed but living in the very apartment where her mother's life had been taken. The sight of the newborn brought a wave of relief to law enforcement and the community, but it also deepened the anguish for Savanna's family. The baby, a symbol of innocence and new life, had been at the center of such unimaginable darkness. As news of Brooke and Williams' arrests spread, so did outrage. Vigils were held across Fargo, with hundreds gathering to honor Savanna's memory and demand justice. Her family, though devastated, stood as pillars of strength, speaking publicly about their love for Savanna and their determination to raise her daughter with the same values and kindness that defined her. The legal process moved swiftly. Prosecutors wasted no time filing charges against both Brooke and William, including conspiracy to commit murder and kidnapping. The evidence was damning, and public sentiment overwhelmingly demanded the harshest possible penalties. Brooke's detailed confession, while horrifying, left little room for doubt about her role in the crime. Williams' involvement, however, remained a subject of debate. While his defense argued that he had been manipulated and coerced by Brooke, prosecutors maintained that his actions after the fact, helping to hide the crime and living with the baby, made him complicit. The case also drew national attention, sparking discussions about violence against Indigenous women. As a member of the Spirit Lake tribe, Savanna's death became a tragic example of the alarming rates at which Indigenous women experience violence in the United States. Advocates called for greater awareness and systemic change, using her story as a rallying cry for justice. Meanwhile, investigators continued to uncover more about Brooks and Williams' lives, piecing together a picture of a volatile relationship marked by manipulation and cruelty. Former acquaintances described Brooke as controlling and emotionally unstable, while William was often seen as passive and detached, following Brooke's lead without question. Together, they had created a toxic dynamic that culminated in this horrific crime. The evidence against them grew stronger by the day. Witnesses came forward describing odd behavior from the couple in the days leading up to and following Savanna's disappearance. One neighbor recalled seeing Brooke pushing a stroller with the baby, proudly showing her off as if nothing was amiss. Another mentioned strange noises coming from their apartment, noises that now seem disturbingly significant in hindsight. Amid the mounting evidence and public scrutiny, Savanna's family focused on honoring her memory and ensuring her daughter's safety. The baby, named Hazley Joe, became the heart of their fight for justice. She was a constant reminder of Savanna's love and the bright future she had dreamed of for her child. The legal proceedings were only just beginning, but the emotional toll on the community was already immense. Fargo had been shaken to its core, grappling with the reality that such an unspeakable act could happen in their midst. The apartment building where Savanna had lived became a symbol of both loss and resilience, its walls now holding the weight of a story no one would ever forget. As the case moved closer to trial, the spotlight remained firmly on Brooke and William. Their every word, every action, was scrutinized as the public sought to understand how such a tragedy could have unfolded. The answers were chilling, but they were only the beginning of a journey toward justice for Savanna and her family. The courtroom in Fargo, North Dakota, was heavy with tension as Brooke Cruz and William Hone faced the full weight of the law. The details of their actions had sent shockwaves through the community, but now it was time for those details to be laid bare. The trial would reveal not just the depth of their crime, but the horrifying precision with which it had been carried out. Brooke, in her chilling confession, claimed that her actions had been fueled by desperation and a twisted desire to hold onto her relationship with William. Her tone in court was devoid of emotion as she described the events leading to Savanna's death. She admitted to luring Savanna upstairs under the guise of needing help with sewing, a calculated ruse designed to exploit Savanna's kindness. Once inside the apartment, Brooke claimed she acted alone in a desperate attempt to take the baby. But the evidence told a more complex story. Prosecutors presented forensic findings from the apartment that suggested William's involvement went beyond what he admitted. Blood spatter analysis and DNA evidence painted a picture of a crime that was not only gruesome, but meticulously planned. The prosecution argued that William had been a willing participant, helping Brooke carry out her plan and clean up afterward. Witness testimony became a cornerstone of the trial. Neighbors recalled hearing unsettling noises from the apartment during the time of Savanna's disappearance. One neighbor described hearing faint cries, which she now realized must have been the newborn baby. Others noted that William and Brooke had shown no signs of panic or remorse in the days following the crime. Instead, they appeared disturbingly calm, even brazen. One witness recounted seeing Brooke strolling through the building with the baby, showing her off as if nothing had happened. The most emotional testimony came from Savanna's family, who described the immense loss they had suffered. Her mother, Norberta, spoke of her daughter's dreams for the future, her excitement about becoming a mother, and the unbearable pain of losing her in such a horrific way. The sight of Hazley Joe, Savanna's infant daughter, was a bittersweet reminder of what had been stolen from them. The family's grief filled the courtroom, a stark contrast to Brooke and William's cold demeanor. Throughout the trial, Brooke maintained that she was solely responsible for Savanna's death, a claim that prosecutors and the public alike found difficult to believe. William, meanwhile, continued to portray himself as a passive figure, someone who had stumbled into the aftermath of Brooke's actions. His defense argued that while he had helped dispose of Savanna's body, he had done so out of fear and manipulation. However, text messages between Brooke and William revealed a disturbing dynamic. The messages showed that Brooke had discussed wanting a baby in the months leading up to the crime, and that William had encouraged her, even suggesting ways they could make it happen. These exchanges painted a damning picture of complicity, undermining William's claims of innocence. The trial also brought to light the couple's troubled history. Former friends and acquaintances described their relationship as volatile, marked by control and manipulation. Brooke had a history of lying to keep William from leaving her, including faking pregnancies in the past. Prosecutors argued that this pattern of behavior escalated into the deadly plan to take Savanna's baby. The defense attempted to humanize William, portraying him as a victim of Brooks' schemes. They called character witnesses to testify about his more passive nature, suggesting that he had been swept up in a situation he couldn't control. But the prosecution countered with the undeniable fact that William had not only assisted in hiding the evidence, but had also lived with the baby, pretending she was theirs, for days after the crime. As the trial progressed, the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore. The prosecution painted a chilling narrative of greed, desperation, and manipulation, underscored by the cold, calculated nature of the crime. The jury was tasked with untangling the web of lies and determining the extent of each defendant's culpability. Outside the courtroom, the community's outrage continued to grow. Vigils were held in Savanna's memory, with attendees calling for justice not only for her, but for the countless Indigenous women who had suffered similar fates. Savanna's story became a rallying cry, shining a spotlight on the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women and the systemic failures that allowed such tragedies to persist. Back inside, the final moments of the trial were marked by an eerie quiet. Brooks' confession, though damning, was not the only piece of the puzzle. The jury's deliberation was long and arduous as they weighed the evidence against both defendants. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom erupted with emotion. Brooke was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. William, despite his attempts to distance himself from the crime, was also convicted, though his charges reflected a lesser degree of involvement. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial, the focus shifted from the details of the crime to its lasting impact. The sentences handed down to Brooke and William offered some measure of closure, but the scars left behind were deep and enduring. For Savanna's family, the journey was far from over. They were now tasked with raising Hazley Joe in the shadow of a tragedy that would forever be part of their story. In the courtroom, there was no celebration, only a somber acknowledgement of justice served. But for the community, and for the nation watching, the case of Savanna Greywind was a call to action, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and the fight to protect the most vulnerable among us. The verdict had been delivered, but for Savanna Greywind's family, the fight for justice was far from over. As Brooke Cruz and William Hone awaited their sentences, the broader impact of their actions began to ripple through the community and beyond. The courtroom may have provided a moment of accountability, but the scars left by their crimes would take much longer to heal. The sentencing phase was a grim reminder of the brutality of the crime. Prosecutors detailed the lasting trauma inflicted on Savanna's family and the community, describing how her life had been stolen in the most callous way. They argued that Brooke and William's actions were premeditated, calculated, and devoid of remorse. The prosecution pushed for the harshest possible penalties, emphasizing that anything less would be an insult to the memory of a young woman whose future had been taken so violently. During this phase, Brooke's demeanor remained chillingly composed. Her previous confessions had painted her as the mastermind, but she now sat in court with an air of detachment, as though the weight of her crimes no longer burdened her. When given the opportunity to address the court, Brooke offered a brief statement of contrition, though her words rang hollow to those who had witnessed her manipulative nature throughout the trial. William, on the other hand, continued to maintain his narrative of being a bystander to Brooke's actions. His defense team highlighted his compliance with law enforcement during the investigation, arguing that his sentence should reflect his secondary role in the crime. However, prosecutors countered by emphasizing his active participation in concealing the evidence and his decision to live with the baby, knowing full well the circumstances of her birth. When the judge delivered the sentences, the courtroom was silent, except for the sound of quiet sobs from Savanna's family. Brooke was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that reflected the heinousness of her actions. William, though receiving a lighter sentence, was handed 20 years behind bars for his role in the crime. For many, this outcome represented justice, though no sentence could truly balance the loss of Savanna's life. Outside the courthouse, the case continued to draw attention from the media and advocacy groups. Savanna's murder had highlighted the systemic issues surrounding violence against Indigenous women, sparking widespread outrage and calls for reform. Statistics about the disproportionate rates of violence faced by Indigenous women began circulating, bringing to light a crisis that had long been ignored. Savanna's story became a symbol of this struggle, her name invoked in rallies, protests, and legislative discussions across the country. One of the most significant outcomes of the case was the Push for Savanna's Act, a piece of legislation aimed at addressing the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The act sought to improve data collection, enhance law enforcement coordination, and increase accountability in cases involving Indigenous victims. Advocacy groups worked tirelessly alongside Savanna's family to ensure her story would lead to meaningful change, turning their grief into a catalyst for justice. For her family, raising Hazley Joe became both a blessing and a responsibility. The baby, miraculously unharmed by the events surrounding her birth, was a reminder of Savanna's love and resilience. Her grandparents and father devoted themselves to giving her the life Savanna had dreamed of, surrounding her with the care and support she would need to grow up in the shadow of such a tragedy. Every milestone in Hazley Joe's life carried the bittersweet weight of her mother's absence, but it also represented a triumph over the darkness that had tried to extinguish her light. In the months following the trial, the apartment complex where the crime had occurred became a focal point of the community's grief and resilience. Neighbors who had once walked past apartment 5 without a second thought now saw it as a haunting reminder of the violence that had unfolded within its walls. For some, the building became too painful to remain in, prompting a wave of move-outs. For others, it was a place to honor Savanna's memory, with makeshift memorials appearing in the hallways and outside the building. The broader community also rallied around Savanna's family, offering support in ways both big and small. Fundraisers were held to help cover legal fees and provide for Hazley Joe's future, while local artists and writers created tributes to keep Savanna's memory alive. Her story touched people far beyond Fargo, resonating with anyone who had experienced loss or injustice. As the years passed, the lessons from Savanna's case remained etched in the minds of those who had followed it. It served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and advocacy. For law enforcement, it prompted introspection about how missing persons cases were handled, particularly when the victims belonged to marginalized communities. For the public, it reinforced the need to recognize and address the warning signs of dangerous behavior before they escalated. Savanna's Act, which eventually passed with bipartisan support, became a testament to her legacy. It was a step toward addressing the systemic failures that had allowed similar cases to go unnoticed or unresolved for far too long. While it couldn't undo the tragedy of her loss, it offered hope that future victims might be spared the same fate. In the aftermath of the trial, Savanna's family continued to advocate for change, speaking at events and working with organizations dedicated to ending violence against Indigenous women. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable loss inspired countless others, turning their personal tragedy into a powerful movement for justice. Through it all, Savanna's name remained a beacon of hope and remembrance. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a catalyst for awareness and reform, ensuring that her story would not fade into obscurity. Instead, it became a call to action, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the fight for justice and compassion must endure. As time moved forward, the echoes of Savanna Greywind's story continued to resonate deeply across the nation. The courtroom battles had ended, and justice had been served in the legal sense, but for her family and the broader community, the work to honor her memory and bring lasting change had only just begun. The tragedy of her loss had transformed into a movement, one that sought to address the systemic issues that had allowed countless similar stories to go unnoticed or unresolved. For her parents, Norberta and Joe, and her boyfriend, Ashton, the focus shifted to raising Hazley Joe, the infant who had survived such unimaginable beginnings. Their home, once a place of laughter and anticipation for Savanna's arrival, now carried a bittersweet duality. Hazley Joe brought light and hope, a piece of Savanna that lived on, but her presence also underscored the absence of the mother who had loved her so fiercely. Raising Hazley Joe became a collective effort. The family ensured she grew up surrounded by love, immersed in the culture and traditions of her Indigenous heritage. They told her stories about Savanna, the way she laughed, her dreams for the future, and her excitement about becoming a mother. They wanted Hazley to know not just the tragedy of her mother's story, but the strength and kindness that had defined her life. As the years passed, Savanna's Act began to take shape. Her family worked closely with lawmakers and advocacy groups to push the legislation forward, attending hearings, sharing their story, and refusing to let her name be forgotten. The act aimed to address the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women, improving coordination between law enforcement agencies, enhancing data collection, and ensuring that cases like Savanna's would receive the attention they deserve. The passage of Savanna's Act was a bittersweet victory. For her family, it was a step toward ensuring that no other family would have to endure what they had. Yet it was also a stark reminder of the loss that had driven the change. When the bill was signed into law, Norberta stood alongside lawmakers, holding a photo of Savanna, her expression a mix of pride and grief. It was a moment of triumph, but it was also a reminder of the cost at which it had come. Beyond the legal and legislative changes, Savanna's story sparked a broader cultural shift. The conversation around violence against Indigenous women gained momentum, with activists using her case as a rallying cry. Vigils, marches, and awareness campaigns were held across the country, drawing attention to the staggering statistics and systemic failures that had long plagued Indigenous communities. The phrase "justice for Savanna" became more than just a call for accountability. It became a symbol of the fight for equality and safety for all women. Savanna's family also became advocates in their own right, sharing their experiences and working to support other families facing similar tragedies. They partnered with organizations dedicated to addressing missing and murdered Indigenous women, offering their voice to amplify the stories that had been silenced for too long. Their resilience in the face of loss inspired others to come forward, to speak out, and to demand change. For the community of Fargo, the impact of Savanna's story was equally profound. The apartment complex where the crime had occurred became a painful reminder of what had been lost, but it also served as a place of reflection and remembrance. Murals and memorials were created in her honor, turning spaces of sorrow into symbols of resilience. Neighbors who had once passed each other in silence now came together, forging connections and building a sense of solidarity that had been missing before. As Halsey Jo grew, she became a living testament to her mother's legacy. Her family ensured she knew the truth about her beginnings, but also shielded her from the weight of the tragedy until she was old enough to understand. They celebrated her milestones with joy, knowing that each birthday, each new achievement, was a continuation of the life Savanna had fought so hard to protect. In her quiet moments, Norberta often found herself reflecting on the journey they had endured. The pain of losing Savanna would never truly fade, but the strength of her daughter's legacy gave her purpose. She thought of the countless lives that had been touched by Savanna's story, the conversations it had sparked, and the change it had inspired. It didn't erase the grief, but it gave it meaning. The impact of Savanna's story extended far beyond the borders of Fargo, far beyond the halls of Congress, where her name was etched into legislation. It became a beacon of hope for families who had felt invisible, a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable loss, there's power in community, in advocacy, and in the pursuit of justice. Savanna's life had been stolen, but her spirit endured, in her family, in the movement that bore her name, and in the hearts of those who had fought to ensure her story would never be forgotten. And while the pain of her absence would always linger, it was tempered by the knowledge that her life, though tragically cut short, had sparked a legacy of resilience, compassion, and change that would endure for generations to come. The next and final story is called Justice for Tristyn. On the early morning of May 9, 2021, the quiet streets of the Durbin Crossing neighborhood in St. Johns County, Florida, were blanketed in darkness. It was Mother's Day, a time meant for celebration, but for the Bailey family, this day would soon become an unthinkable nightmare. Inside their home, Tristyn Bailey's family was just beginning to stir, expecting the usual routines of a Sunday morning. But something was off. Tristyn, their spirited 13-year-old daughter, was nowhere to be found. Tristyn was known for her lively personality, her dedication to cheerleading, and her close bond with her family. She wasn't the type to simply wander off without telling someone. Concern quickly turned to alarm as calls to her phone went unanswered. Her last known whereabouts were a mystery, and the family began retracing her steps. They reached out to her friends, but no one had seen her since the night before. Panic set in as they realized Tristyn had disappeared without a trace. As the morning light crept over the suburban landscape, neighbors began joining the search. By mid-morning, word of her disappearance spread through the tight-knit community, sparking a coordinated effort to find her. Flyers were printed, social media posts went live, and volunteers combed the neighborhood, calling out Tristyn's name. The Baileys could only hope that she would be found safe, that this was all a misunderstanding. But the uneasy quiet that hung over Durban Crossing told a different story. The first major lead came from a neighbor who had surveillance cameras positioned to monitor the area. Reviewing the footage from the early hours of the morning, they found something unusual. The video showed Tristyn walking along a quiet residential street with a boy, a familiar face to some in the community. He was identified as Aiden Fucci, a 14-year-old classmate. The footage captured them heading toward a wooded area, and it was the last time Tristyn was seen alive. That single frame of video sent chills through those who watched it. Aiden was well known at school, but his reputation was mixed. Some described him as charismatic and outgoing, while others mentioned troubling behavior, an interest in violence and unsettling jokes about harming others. As investigators began piecing together the timeline, Aiden became the focus of their search. Hours later, a discovery was made that would shatter the hearts of Tristyn's family and send shockwaves through the community. In a wooded area near a retention pond, a local resident stumbled upon a horrific scene: Tristyn's lifeless body. The scene spoke to a level of brutality that was almost incomprehensible. She had been stabbed multiple times, a detail that would later reveal the sheer ferocity of the attack. News of the discovery spread quickly, and with it came a profound sense of grief and disbelief. How could something so horrific happen in such a seemingly safe and peaceful neighborhood? The Baileys, who had spent the day clinging to hope, were now faced with the unthinkable reality that their daughter was gone. The investigation escalated rapidly. Aiden Fucci, the boy seen with Tristyn in the surveillance footage, was taken in for questioning. As police pressed him for answers, his demeanor was far from what anyone expected. Instead of remorse or fear, Aiden displayed a disturbing lack of concern. His statements were evasive, shifting the blame and denying involvement. But it wasn't just his words that alarmed investigators, it was his actions. While sitting in the back of a police car, Aiden pulled out his phone and took a selfie. In the image, he wore a smirk, and the caption he posted on Snapchat read, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristyn lately?" The post, dripping with callousness, sent waves of outrage through the community. It was as though he was mocking the severity of what had happened, taunting those who were desperate for answers. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the area where Tristyn's body had been found. The evidence they uncovered painted a chilling picture of what had transpired in the early hours of Mother's Day. Blood-stained clothing and a knife, believed to be the weapon used in the attack, were recovered near the scene. Each piece of evidence brought investigators closer to confirming what they already suspected. Aiden Fucci was responsible for Tristyn's death. As the day wore on, more details about the case emerged. Friends and classmates came forward with stories about Aiden's troubling behavior. Yeah, Mare, you're the troubling behavior. He had reportedly talked about his fascination with violence and even joked about wanting to harm someone, but no one had taken his comments seriously. Now, those words felt like warnings that had gone unheeded. The discovery of Tristyn's body and Aiden's subsequent arrest left the community in a state of shock. Vigils were held in her honor, with hundreds gathering to mourn the loss of a young life full of promise. Her cheerleading team lit candles and released balloons, a somber tribute to their teammate and friend. The grief was palpable, but so too was the determination to seek justice. By the end of that fateful day, the evidence against Aiden was mounting. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic findings all pointed to his involvement. Yet the motive for such a senseless and brutal act remained unclear. What could have driven a 14-year-old boy to commit such an unthinkable crime? As investigators delved deeper into Aiden's past, they began to uncover unsettling patterns, dark interests, disturbing comments, and a growing detachment from empathy. The community, still reeling from the loss of Tristyn, braced itself for the revelations to come. The search for answers had only just begun, and with it came the promise of a deeper understanding of the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. As Aiden Fucci sat in the interrogation room, his behavior raised immediate questions. Investigators observed his demeanor closely. He seemed distant, detached, and uninterested in the gravity of the situation. When questioned, Aiden acknowledged spending time with Tristyn Bailey that evening, but his account of the events was vague and inconsistent. He initially claimed they were walking around the neighborhood before going their separate ways. However, As investigators pressed him for details, his story began to falter. At the same time, forensic teams were analyzing evidence recovered from the wooded area where Tristyn's body had been found. Among the items collected were articles of clothing and personal items, all of which were sent for analysis. The findings suggested a connection between Aiden and the crime scene, deepening investigators' focus on him. In addition to physical evidence, investigators uncovered concerning social media activity linked to Aiden. Messages sent to his friends contained troubling comments, some of which now appeared to foreshadow his actions. These messages, once dismissed as juvenile jokes, took on a chilling significance in light of the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, Aiden's family became part of the inquiry. Surveillance footage from their home revealed his mother, Crystal Smith, attempting to clean an item of clothing. This raised questions about whether she had knowingly interfered with the investigation, leading to additional scrutiny and potential charges. Her actions became a focal point, further complicating the case. The revelation sent shock waves through the community. Classmates came forward, recounting stories of Aiden's troubling behavior, which they had previously overlooked. Many were left questioning how these red flags had gone unnoticed, and what more could have been done to prevent such a tragedy. Tristyn's family, in their profound grief, chose to focus on honoring her memory and seeking justice. Vigils were held in her name, and the community rallied around the family, offering support in any way they could. Her teammates, friends, and neighbors remembered her as a bright, kind, and spirited individual whose life had touched so many. As the case against Aiden grew, prosecutors made the decision to charge him with a serious offense, citing the evidence pointing to his involvement. The severity of the situation led them to consider trying him as an adult, given the gravity of the case and its implications. This decision brought a mix of emotions, sparking debates about accountability, rehabilitation, and justice. The investigation continued to uncover more details, slowly piecing together the events of that fateful night. While the community grappled with the enormity of what had happened, the search for answers pressed on, revealing not just the tragedy of Tristyn's loss, but the importance of vigilance and community support in the pursuit of justice. The deeper investigators delved into the case, the more chilling the picture became. As evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that Aiden Fuchi's actions were not impulsive but calculated. The forensic analysis, witness accounts, and digital evidence painted a story that left the community reeling and searching for answers. Forensic experts carefully examined the evidence collected from the wooded area. The items recovered provided critical insights into the timeline and sequence of events. Analysts focused on a knife found near the scene, along with personal items belonging to Tristyn. These items underwent rigorous testing, and the findings played a pivotal role in building the case against Aiden. The results further linked him to the crime, providing a trail that investigators could no longer ignore. But it wasn't just physical evidence that told the story. Aiden's digital footprint offered a window into his mindset. Investigators reviewed text messages and social media posts from the days leading up to the incident. These communications revealed concerning patterns of behavior, including comments that hinted at troubling thoughts. While these messages were initially dismissed by those who received them, they now took on a disturbing significance. Classmates and acquaintances began coming forward, sharing stories that cast a new light on Aiden's behavior. Several described him as someone who often made offhand comments about dark topics, which were usually brushed off as attempts to get attention. However, in hindsight, these remarks raised critical questions about the warning signs that had been missed. While investigators worked to piece together Aiden's motivations, the impact of Tristyn's loss reverberated through the community. Vigils continued to be held in her memory, and her family worked tirelessly to ensure her life was celebrated, not overshadowed by the tragedy. The community rallied around them, offering unwavering support during their darkest days. Meanwhile, the legal team representing Aiden prepared for the charges that had been brought against him. Initially charged with second-degree murder, prosecutors now faced the question of whether to elevate the charge to first degree, given the evidence pointing to premeditation. The possibility of trying Aiden as an adult became a central point of discussion, sparking debate over how justice should be served for such a young defendant. In the courtroom, emotions ran high as each new piece of evidence was presented. The knife found near the scene, the surveillance footage of Tristyn and Aiden walking together, and Aiden's digital communications formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. But it was the testimony from those who knew him that added a deeply human element to the proceedings. Witnesses described Aiden as a boy who often sought attention in unconventional ways, but their accounts also revealed a pattern of troubling comments that had gone unaddressed. Friends admitted that they didn't take his words seriously at the time, but now they carried a much heavier weight. This testimony underscored the importance of recognizing warning signs and taking them seriously, a lesson that resonated deeply with parents and educators alike. As the community watched the case unfold, the focus shifted beyond the specifics of Tristyn's tragedy. Discussions about youth mental health, social media's influence, and the importance of early intervention became central themes. Parents, teachers, and community leaders came together to find ways to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Through it all, Tristyn's family remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice. They attended every hearing, ensuring that Tristyn's memory was never overshadowed by the complexities of the case. Their resilience inspired others, turning their grief into a powerful call for accountability and change. As the investigation drew closer to its conclusion, the narrative began to shift from uncovering the facts to ensuring justice was served. Each new revelation brought the community one step closer to understanding the full scope of what had happened, but it also reinforced the gravity of the loss they had experienced. The pursuit of answers continued, as did the determination to honor Tristyn's life in a way that would ensure her story left a lasting impact. The courtroom in St. Johns County became the focal point of a community still reeling from the devastating loss of Tristyn Bailey. The trial of Aiden Fucci was set to begin, and with it came a swirl of emotions, grief, anger, and a collective desire for answers. For Tristyn's family, and the many who had gathered to support them, this was more than a trial. It was a fight for justice. As the trial commenced, the prosecution presented a detailed account of the events leading up to and following Tristyn's disappearance. They laid out the evidence meticulously, beginning with the surveillance footage that showed Tristyn and Aiden walking together in the early morning hours. It was the last known image of Tristyn alive, and its haunting simplicity set the tone for what was to come. Next came the forensic evidence. Analysts testified about the items recovered from the wooded area and their connection to Aiden. The knife found near the scene was a key piece of evidence, along with the clothing investigators had retrieved from Aiden's home. Both bore traces of physical evidence linking him to the crime. The prosecution's case was bolstered by these findings, which painted a grim picture of what had transpired. But perhaps the most impactful moments came from witness testimonies. Friends and classmates recounted Aiden's troubling behavior in the weeks leading up to the incident. Their accounts were chilling, revealing a pattern of comments and actions that hinted at a fascination with violence. One classmate described how Aiden often made remarks about harm that were dismissed as dark humor at the time. Another testified about conversations in which Aiden seemed preoccupied with attention-seeking behaviors that involved shocking or unsettling others. The courtroom was silent as these testimonies unfolded, each new detail adding to the weight of the case against Aiden. For Tristyn's family, hearing these accounts was agonizing. They listened with unwavering strength, determined to see justice served for their daughter. Aiden's defense team, however, sought to shift the narrative. They argued that his age and lack of maturity should be considered, emphasizing that Aiden was just 14 years old at the time of the incident. They claimed his actions, while tragic, stemmed from impulsivity rather than premeditation. They pointed to the challenges of adolescence, framing Aiden's behavior as a misguided cry for attention rather than a calculated plan. But the prosecution countered with the evidence of premeditation. Text messages and social media posts from Aiden painted a starkly different picture, one of intention and detachment. Prosecutors argued that his actions went far beyond impulsivity and that the gravity of the crime warranted the most severe consequences. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll became evident. Tristyn's family gave powerful impact statements, describing the profound loss they felt and the vibrant, loving person Tristyn had been. Her mother spoke through tears about the moments they would never get to share, from milestones like graduations to the everyday joy of seeing her daughter's smile. Her words echoed through the courtroom, leaving many in tears. The prosecution's closing argument was a plea for accountability. They reminded the jury of the evidence, the testimonies, and the devastating impact of Aiden's actions. They urged the jury to consider not just the facts of the case but the life that had been taken, and the family left behind to pick up the pieces. The defense's closing argument leaned heavily on Aiden's age and potential for rehabilitation. They asked the jury to consider the possibility of redemption, framing the trial as not just a quest for justice, but a decision about the future of a young defendant. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom fell into an uneasy quiet. Hours felt like days as everyone waited for the verdict. Outside, supporters of Tristyn's family gathered, holding candles and signs that read, "Justice for Tristyn." The community's unity was a testament to the impact Tristyn had on those who knew her, and even those who didn't. Finally, the verdict was announced. The jury found Aiden Fucci guilty of first-degree murder. The decision to try him as an adult had been upheld, and the sentence reflected the severity of his actions. While his age protected him from the harshest penalties, the conviction ensured he would face significant consequences for what he had done. The courtroom erupted in emotion. For Tristyn's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, though it could never fully heal the wounds left by her loss. For the community, it was a moment of solidarity, a collective acknowledgement that justice had been served. As Aiden was led from the courtroom, the focus began to shift from the trial to the lasting impact of Tristyn's story. Her family vowed to honor her memory, turning their pain into a mission to raise awareness and prevent similar tragedies. The trial may have ended, but the journey to heal and ensure Tristyn's legacy endured was just beginning. The courtroom had fallen silent after the verdict was read, but for Tristyn Bailey's family, the fight was not over. Justice had been served in a legal sense, but the emotional toll of her loss would be felt for the rest of their lives. Outside the courthouse, the community gathered to show their support. Candles flickered in the evening light as friends, neighbors, and even strangers stood in solidarity with the Baileys, offering them a collective embrace of hope and healing. Tristyn's family turned their grief into action, determined to honor her memory in a way that would make a lasting difference. They established initiatives in her name, focusing on fostering kindness, uplifting youth, and creating spaces where young people could seek help when they felt lost or isolated. Her story became a beacon for change, a reminder of the importance of empathy and vigilance in building a safer world. The impact of Tristyn's story reached far beyond her immediate community. Conversations about youth mental health and the role of social media in shaping behavior gained national attention. Parents, educators, and community leaders used her case as a wake-up call, emphasizing the need for open dialogue and proactive intervention to address troubling behaviors in young people. Her family spoke at events, advocating for greater awareness and resources to help at-risk youth before it was too late. Aiden Fucci's sentence brought an end to one chapter of the tragedy, but it also sparked broader discussions about accountability and rehabilitation. While the legal system had determined his fate, society grappled with larger questions about how to address violent tendencies in adolescence and how to balance justice with the potential for redemption. Experts weighed in, exploring the psychological factors that could lead a teenager to commit such an act and offering insights into preventative measures. Meanwhile, Tristyn's family worked to ensure her vibrant spirit would not be defined solely by her tragic end. Her cheerleading team created a scholarship in her honor, celebrating her dedication, teamwork, and boundless energy. Each year, the scholarship would support a young athlete who embodied the same values Tristyn had demonstrated: passion, determination, and a kind heart. The Baileys also collaborated with local organizations to implement community programs designed to foster stronger connections among young people. These programs included mentorship opportunities, after-school activities, and safe spaces for teens to express themselves without judgment. Tristyn's name became synonymous with positivity and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, it was possible to build something meaningful. In the quiet moments away from the public eye, Tristyn's family found solace in memories of her. They spoke of her laughter, her love for her siblings, and the way she lit up every room she entered. They kept her presence alive through family traditions, celebrating her birthday with acts of kindness and dedicating moments of joy to her memory. These small personal rituals became a source of comfort, a way to keep her close as they moved forward. The community of St. Johns County also carried the lessons of Tristyn's story. Schools implemented programs to teach students about empathy, conflict resolution, and the importance of seeking help when they or someone they knew was struggling. Parents became more engaged, fostering open conversations with their children about mental health and the challenges of navigating adolescence. Tristyn's legacy became a rallying point, inspiring a collective effort to create a safer, more supportive environment for all young people. As the years passed, the Bailey family continued to advocate for change. They shared Tristyn's story with other grieving families, offering support and guidance to those walking similar paths. Their resilience became a source of inspiration, showing others that it was possible to turn pain into purpose. Through their efforts, Tristyn's name remained a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of compassion and community could shine through. Tristyn's life, though tragically cut short, left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her and countless others who came to know her story. Her memory lived on in the laughter of her siblings, the dedication of her teammates, and the countless acts of kindness performed in her honor. Her story was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And while the pain of her loss would never truly fade, her legacy ensured that her light would continue to shine, guiding others toward a brighter future. If these stories of young lives tragically stolen left you reflecting on the fragility of trust and the need for justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange, dark, and mysterious. Turn on notifications so you never miss one of our daily uploads. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think can be done to prevent such heartbreaking tragedies in the future? Thank you for watching, and remember, every voice matters in the fight for justice. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story.